Hello and Happy New Year 2026. Welcome back to Paranormal NL Podcast, located in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. That's PNL Podcast for short. I'm your host and founder, Jen Noseworthy. Thank you for tuning in to UPRN, United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and 105.3 FM on that Gulf. For tonight's Ancient Guru special on UPRN segment number 62, I've got a special guest waiting backstage from British Columbia, Canada, and a co-host from Texas, USA, who I'll bring on shortly. Now it's time to grab your ancient civilization jar and pour some brew in it. Grab a few geeky munchies and get ready for that show tonight. Paranormal NL Podcast is sponsored by the Bog Team. It's a boots-on-the-ground Bog Team doing historical paranormal investigations in Newfoundland, Canada. Follow PNL Podcast and the Bog Team on their Linktree, Paranormal NL Podcast, and smash those subscribe buttons. All Bog Team music heard in the intro and the exit is available for download on all social media and streaming music platforms. Tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on UPRN for a PNL Podcast with a YouTube and a Facebook live chat watch party. PNL Podcast believes in supporting international paranormal networking and highlighting global paranormal people, places, and things. Now, let's get on with the show tonight. I bring it on stage again to bring the co-host on first, Dr. Judd Burton. Welcome.
Thank you, Jen. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being back on the show. Dr. Burton, you were on the show before, way back in season 1 and season 2 and season 3. So welcome back. And now we have
Well, thank you for...
guest. Yeah, go ahead.
Just going to say I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming back again, Doc. Okay, we're going to bring our guest on the stage here. We've got Ken. Welcome, Ken. And yeah, so Ken, you're all the way from Canada, British Columbia. And
that's right.
Dr. Burton, you're way over in Texas. And I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves. I guess since you're a co-host, Dr. Burton, do you want to go first? And then we'll have Ken go ahead after that.
Sure. My name is Dr. Judd Burton. I'm a historian and anthropologist by trade. I'm currently the director and senior fellow of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology. And I've done work all over the globe, mostly historical, anthropological, archaeological work. But I've had a long time interest in the supernatural and how it pertains to the ancient world. And I teach classes on that and write on it, as you know.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for coming back on the show. And of course, we've got Ken. Ken, do you want to introduce yourself and give a few shout outs to yourself and your accolades and whatnot?
Yeah, for sure. So by day, I am a technical analyst, solutions architect, and I work on implementation of large scale systems for business. Things like HR systems and stuff like that, where there's a lot of configuration, a lot of moving parts, and so that's kind of my day job. And then by night, I like to sort of apply technology ideas to ancient myths, and because I guess I noticed as I was doing research on some Sumerian myths and some biblical stories as well, that there seems to be some stuff in there that if you wanted to, you could interpret like maybe they're talking about some high-tech stuff. Not necessarily saying that that's definitely what they're talking about, but I guess I like to ask the question of, is it possible, and can you get a consistent story out of it? And what I'm finding is that, yeah, you can. So it makes you wonder.
Right,
so that's
right.
kind of my thing. Yeah.
And I guess that kind of, leads up to a few of your books, as you're both authors. And Ken, you've got one here, UFOs in the Bible. And Dr. Burton, I mean, you talk a lot about the Bible with your institute.
Mm-hmm.
So are there,
Certainly.
yeah, I was going to say, are there some references or some things? Because I see, like in this picture, you've got the. To me, I think about Enoch when I see this, and that's what I
Yeah.
think about UFOs in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that the picture is actually Ezekiel. Well, it's based on a medieval interpretation of Ezekiel's vision. Well, that is to say, what we typically interpret Ezekiel's story as it being a vision. And he's clearly talking about the fact that he saw something, but a lot of it, a lot of it seems to be physical phenomenon that he's experiencing and describing, and trying to wrap his head around. So that's sort of the deal with that. In that book, I cover about close to 50 different encounters, which classically we describe those as being encounters with God. But again, when you read into the actual texts, you see strange descriptions that you wouldn't generally think of. God as being, is God made out of metal? Is God bronze? Does he have smoke coming out? So there's like some weird descriptions that don't really jive well with sort of a classical understanding.
There
Judd, what
are,
do you
right?
got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Ken, as you were talking, I thought about, there's some things happening in sort of in the spaces that I move around, and I guess what you would call the Christian fringe, where we're looking at a lot of these kinds of questions about, for the longest time, particularly for a materialized, naturalized society, we've separated the supernatural and the natural. Like there's this sharp dividing line between the material and the ephemeral.
Yeah.
And that's not always something. In fact, it's an exception to the rule in the mind of ancient peoples. They didn't intellectually compartmentalize a lot of things like we do today, and so I've been part of some really interesting discussions about the physicality, things like the physicality of angels, and the cherubs and the seraphim and the various kinds of throne guardians that exist in biblical theology. And so I
Yeah,
find
because
that
when people think about the paranormal, you know what, guys? A lot of times they don't think about, the Bible. Hey, it's supernatural and very paranormal, right?
Absolutely.
well,
Yeah.
certainly, and I think Ken might agree with me anyway that it's a book that allows for the notion that technology and the supernatural are not mutually exclusive. Again, that's one of those big modern demarcations that anthropologists working back in like the early 20th century, sort of during the golden age of anthropology, just sort of blew out of the water by studying peoples that still thought along the lines of mythology. People like Branislaw Malinowski, who did his work on the Trobriand Islanders, and he found that, as did many anthropologists working on similar kinds of societies, that these people don't make those distinctions between the technological and the supernatural in many cases.
Right. Like we like to compartmentalize everything, and that's sort of a unique, well, maybe not unique, but it's not necessarily something that that people have always done, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Ken, I love your logo, Dimension Fold, exploring the ancient and the weird, because it's all so weird. Like, and everybody is trying to explain it, and that's why Dr. Burton, isn't that why you went into your different degrees and stuff? That archaeology, anthropology to try to like figure all this out?
Well, certainly. I mean, and I had the I had the curriculum that was being presented before me, a sort of conventional academia, and then I had all these questions about, well, like the notion that I just brought up is, if we're looking at ancient peoples who still conceptualize their reality through the lens of mythology, then there are a lot of things that we project onto the past, which is a phenomenon known as presentism, that sort of strips the context away from ancient peoples. And so, yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it is why I went into the fields I went into.
Yeah, Ken, I mean, there's so many different things that, when you read it and look into the ancient. I was always fascinated with ancient stuff when I was a kid. Like, where did this come from? And like, why did they do all this, right?
Yeah.
What got you hooked, or when did you get hooked?
Well, I guess it's always been something that I've been interested in. I mean, like, I was raised Christian from a very young age, and so I was always in church, and we would talk about all kinds of things. And some of those things are pretty weird, though. We kind of tend to forget about that they're weird because it's just part of our normal kind of enculturation. But when you think about them, it's like, yeah, there's some kind of crazy stuff in some of that stuff. And then along with that, I was interested in like Egyptology. I don't remember exactly when I got into that, but I had, picture books about pyramids and King Tut and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
which I spent hours looking at. And I think before I'm guessing when I was about 8 or so, I used to I spent most of my time reading encyclopedias, if you can believe
Yes, I
that.
was
So
just going to mention the encyclopedia. But
Mhm.
as a kid, you'd had to go do your book report, so you'd pull out the Britannica, right, encyclopedia,
yeah,
and I think
yeah,
I even cut ours up and put it on a book report. But
Oh
yeah, I
my.
mean, the pyramid tech is so interesting. Like, a lot of people think, oh, that's where all these people were buried. But when you really dig into it, right, Ken, with the physics and the chemistry, it's more like a machine or something.
yeah. So I don't claim to know what the pyramids are for, but I'm almost 100% sure that they're not tombs.
They're
So
definitely not
yeah,
tombs.
right.
Yeah, even though
So
like Khufu said Khufu was here or something, that doesn't mean he built it. I could go do
Hmm.
yeah,
graffiti down at my local World War II place and say Jen was here. Millennia
that's right.
later, they're going to say Jen built that because she was there. No, I didn't build it. I just
That's
graffitied
right.
my name on it.
That's right. I
Hmm.
put one of my band stickers onto the CN Tower in Toronto. Does that mean I made it? Sure, I'll take credit for
Right.
it.
Shout out to Ken's band, Dead Wrongs.
Yeah, the Dead Wrongs.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you like country music or honky tonk, old school kind of outlaw country, check out the Dead Wrongs on Spotify.
cool. Love it. Aren't you doing some guitar stuff too, Burton?
Not nearly as much as I used to, but a little bit. I mean, if you're talking outlaw country, that's the stuff I cut my teeth on. So I dig it. I'll have to check you guys out.
Nice.
Yeah, love it. So I think I heard a new book in the works. I'm going to throw it up on stage. I haven't looked at this one. Tell us about this one. Because you know what? Everybody wonders, what the hell? Like, why did they put so many animals on a bunch of statues? What's your theory? Looks like you and Dr. Jonkins, Aaron Jonkins.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we
Okay,
colleague.
you just dropped for a second, but you're back. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Aaron is a longtime colleague of mine. He's a biblical archaeologist, and I've been thinking about writing a book on Gobekli Tepe and sort of looking at it through the lens of the Bible, especially Genesis, for a while, because when I taught in college, I spent a good quarter of the semester talking about prehistory because it never gets talked about enough. It's foundational for, what we would later label as civilization, but it was always treated like and to a large degree is still treated like a speed bump to get to city-state dwelling, which is a huge mistake in my estimation. But Aaron called me up one day and said, "Hey, I've been thinking about doing this book on Gobekli Tepe. There aren't too many biblical scholars that are really looking at it. What do you think?" I said, "Well, I've kind of been thinking about doing that." I said, "Why don't we write it together?" And so we did. And ancient Anatolia, prehistoric Anatolia, is so fascinating in and of its own right, but it has some people often forget that it actually has a really crucial role in the biblical narrative, because there are a lot of things that are taking place in ancient and prehistoric Anatolia. Noah's Ark is a famous one. Eden is one of the big contenders for its location. Is at the headwaters of the Euphrates and the Tigris, which is in Turkey. And then Abraham, of course, was from Haran, which is in southern Turkey. So there's a lot, that's really just sort of skimming the surface, but there's a lot going on there. And given that Gobekli Tepe was sort of located in this region, in Abraham's backyard, not far from where the ark came to rest, ostensibly not far from Eden, we thought that we would tackle that issue, and the result of that was this book.
So, why do you think they put all the animals on there?
Well, I think looking at Gobekli Tepe anthropologically, what you're seeing is a transition from animism to, probably because of direct encounter, a change in their way of thinking and depicting the gods. It's interesting because the animals represent some of their totemic, the older totemic beliefs that these peoples would have had. But the standing architecture is what's anthropomorphic, and these are the T-shaped pillars and things like that. Those are representations of how they're beginning to think about the gods, and that's one of the things that Aaron and I talk about in the book is they had direct contact, direct experiences with these gods at places like Gobekli Tepe. But this phenomenon of this transition between animism and anthropomorphic polytheism can be seen in a number of other developing cultures. Although it's later than Gobekli Tepe, the same thing can be very visibly seen amongst the Olmec and Mesoamerica, because they're sort of octad or naiad of gods that they worshipped were largely all a combination of human and animal components. So I think a very similar thing is happening with the construction of Gobekli Tepe. It's really a site that sort of it shatters the paradigm in a lot of ways, because we thought for the longest time that civilizations emerged based on the development of agriculture and the kind of sedentarism that was epiphenomenal to it. But religion seems to be the entire impetus for the construction of this sacred city. For all intents and purposes, it was the social organization and the centralization of power, and agriculture, all of that came in the wake of the building of the religious structures at Gobekli Tepe. So it sort of throws older ideas like Veer Gordon Child's Neolithic revolution idea, where agriculture came first. It really sort of throws that out the window, and yet you still see college and high school textbooks, parroting this idea that this is the universal model for the emergence of civilization. But it falls short of any serious historical or archaeological scrutiny, if we're being honest.
Yeah,
It's
because
kind of silly, yeah.
Yeah, because when you do go back and look at the Bible, you'd mention some weird monsters and stuff like that. I mean, that's pretty supernatural to me. And why in when you look at Egypt, are there all these different things with like a bird head and a man body and all these kind of weird things? It's
right.
there's definitely
Yes.
monsters in the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. And there's it's the combination or the chimera, I guess, which is really fascinating. I know one of my friends, Ralph Ellis, is another prolific author who has written a bunch of books, and his books focus on like tying together ancient Egypt with more of like the Jesus legend. Is in his mind, there's legend, um, and so it's quite fascinating to look at overlaps between these different traditions, and then also kind of this idea of um, like I don't want to really say zodiac, but it is, I guess, the best description I have for it, where it's like the idea of with the precession of the equinoxes, the ancient people have been aware of these long phases or kind of epochs, which seems to mirror the zodiac that we still use today. And it's like such this ancient, like very ancient tradition. Nobody really knows where it came from.
Right. How
And
did they know
there's,
all that, right, Ken?
yeah, how did they know that? So it seems like there's evidence of that in Gobekli Tepe and other places in Turkey as well. And I'm wondering, I guess, Judd, what's your opinion about like the idea of where they actually covered the Gobekli Tepe site in it? It seems that that was intentionally buried with like river rock, essentially, which means that they're like thousands of people must have had to carry rocks up from the riverbed, who knows where, but probably several kilometers up to the site and buried this. And I'm just wondering, like, do is there any evidence that each of the enclosures at Gobekli Tepe may have been used for a particular period and then buried because it was now obsolete or out of date, or they were moving on to the next phase?
Well, I mean, that is a fascinating question. I think that there are a number of possibilities. One of them is that it was a kind of meant to be a kind of time capsule to be rediscovered at some point in the future. That would certainly put a lot of impetus behind the intentional burial of the site, that they deemed it so important. Now, of course, you probably know this. I mean, the complex itself is about 300 meters square. I mean, it's an immense site that we've only scratched the surface, so to speak.
Could Dr. Burton, natural things could have buried it, or was it definitely man who covered it up?
Well, it's starting to look like it. I mean, it's an intentional covering. So, in other words, like at an archaeological site, sometimes if you have stratigraphic layers, if they impinge on one another, or you've got maybe an earthquake or a flood or something, you'll have layers sometimes that blend into one another and get all mixed up. And depositions of just, rock and soil and broken pottery if it's at the site, or artifacts, and it's just a hodgepodge. And archaeologists call that matrix. That doesn't appear to be what happened at Gobekli Tepe. In other words, the rock that we're talking about here has it, because it's a uniform kind of rock. We can source the rock. We know where it came from. It was a labor, an organized labor, in order to accomplish this feat. And I think one of the reasons was to preserve whatever knowledge that they had acquired in these encounters that I was talking about.
So weird, right?
Yeah. So with these encounters, like what kind of beings are they talking about here? Are they like, is this a psychological phenomenon, like something similar to the cult of what is it, Odysseus? No, I can't think of how do you say it? I'm thinking of, like, in the Greco-Roman world, they had these Elysius, that's it, the Elysian
Elysium.
cults,
Mm-hmm.
where where they would basically get high and have a fun weekend or whatever. I'm sure it was more,
Sure.
a little bit more serious than that. But like, it's almost as if this was like the closest thing we have today might be something more akin to Burning Man, where it's like people are intentionally going to a specific location to do a specific thing. And ours tends to be very hedonistic. And I'm sure that the Elysian cults did include that type of thing, but also there's this other layer where it's more philosophical.
They had the hedonism too.
Yeah, for sure they did.
The mystery cults that you're referencing, and this is we could really go down a rabbit trail on this one. Fortunately for the classical world, we have a lot of records from the Greeks about ritual and medicine, and you can't really separate those two in the ancient Greek context. So the ingestion of a myriad of kinds of hallucinogenic herbs and plants is well attested. I'm thinking about there was a find in Egypt from the Ptolemaic period that had one of these, had residues of this concoction, which included the blue lotus, which was had hallucinogenic properties. But the same sorts of things were undoubtedly happening in the Gobekli Tepe region. In the late, probably the entire Mesolithic and Neolithic period, at least. When man's relationship with plants began to drastically change. So yeah, there probably was a ritual use of hallucinogens there, and even today, people that do things like yahe or ayahuasca report encountering entities in these altered states.
Yeah.
And again, if we're just applying a sort of modern materialist, commodification of culture approach to it, then it just renders those experiences as, well, it's something chemical that's happening in the brain. But to have all these reports coming back of these visceral encounters with these entities, both positive and negative. There are definitely negative experiences that people have. sort of applying the same logic that we began the program with, separating the natural and the supernatural doesn't really get us very far in this context. And so I think the encounters that people were having with these entities, that in the book we identify with the biblical watchers, but the Sumerians would have called them the Apkallu, and they have their analogs in all mythologies and cultures. But they were preternatural encounters. In other words, it's both a spiritual and a physical encounter at the same time. And I think that sort of sets the stage for the encounter.
So do you think that maybe, Dr. Burton, there could have been some kind of thing that was going to happen to the planet and they knew it and they did all this to, like you said, a time capsule, like these are our animals, and how we're keeping our seeds of plants and stuff like that, because just in case we decide to hit the button or something. Could it be something like that they did? What do you think about that, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, we have stories about that, right? Like that's essentially the Noah's Ark story. And it's about preservation. It's about it's about cataclysm and catastrophe. And we tend to think about that as on a global scale. But if you bring back the sort of the keeping in mind the environment that the author was in at the time, I see a couple of different possibilities for where that could have occurred, and we're going back into getting into the range of at least 8,000 years ago. If you look at some of the more geological evidence of where major floods occurred, which would have had that type of effect. One springs to mind is that the Persian Gulf did not exist 8,000 years ago, and it came into existence in a very rapid scale in terms of geology over the course of about a couple hundred years. The what used to be a verdant valley where the Euphrates and Tigris would have joined together and created a super river flowing down into the ocean. And then there's mythological references to Enki's bar that no, what would they call it? The the bar that bars the sea, something like that. I've got one of those words wrong. But essentially, that's one of the topics of my Atrahasis uh, book, which I mean, it's literally just looking at the ancient legend and then doing a little bit of interpretation on top. But it seems to be that they're talking about that they had a large scale dam in place that as the sea rose higher and higher, eventually the dam failed. And if that's true, then the flooding of the what's now the Persian Gulf could have taken place over a matter of weeks instead of a couple hundred years. And there's also archaeological evidence to indicate that around 7,500 years ago was when we start seeing settlements popping up around what the current coastline of the Persian Gulf. So it kind of adds up that prior to that time, people would have lived down in the valley. Once it got flooded out, they had to move their settlements up. So things like that, or possibly even farther back. I mean, if you want to take it really far back, look at the flooding of the Mediterranean Sea, which was almost, I want to say, 5 million years ago. So it kind of pushes the limits of believability. But also, you got to wonder, is it possible that humans could have been telling a story through oral tradition for millions of years rather than just thousands? I mean, we've been physically capable of speech for for well over that time. Like,
Yeah, and
um,
Ken, do you know what? I'm gonna interrupt you there and
yeah,
say, do you know when you said oral speech, that's the number one way that Indigenous people communicate, still to
mhm,
this day,
yeah,
is
and
oral tradition, and the
that's right,
elders, they pass on everything.
that's
So,
right.
and it's so interesting when you listen and talk to the Ute and, about, shall we say, let's get into sky people. Were these sky people us? Did we actually go to the moon? And I don't know, did we have like high tech and then screw it all up and blow ourselves up? And now we're back 350 circle again? Or
Yeah,
what do you,
I don't think we can rule that out. I mean, um, I would like to see a lot more evidence, but I mean, we do have. There's a lot of weird things in the archaeological record, um, and certainly some of them are probably frauds that somebody planted or was, you know, trying to pull off a joke or something. But there's enough weird things that make you stop and think, where you kind of have to wonder if, well, maybe that is possible, and if that was the case, let's say we had spacefaring a million years ago, um, any material that we would have been using, like metals, primarily metals and plastic and stuff like that, um, would certainly deteriorate. Like even the most hardy plastics that we currently make are not going to last a million years.
true? True that. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take long for nature to take over. Look what happened during COVID. Sure, all the animals started coming out in the street. It didn't take them long to come back and say, "Hey, humans around here. Let's hang out here." So,
Yeah, that's right.
you know, and going back over here to your books. Now, I know Dr. Burton, we have this underlying thing. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's
Yeah, yeah.
aliens. Okay, do you want to say anything about that before we
uh,
talk about aliens?
well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by alien. I mean, uh, I've been fond of saying that the Mount Hermon event that I've written about from the Book of Enoch, where the Watchers descend on the summit of Mount Hermon. Um, that's a that's an extraterrestrial event technically, because they're not those entities are not from our physical realm. Um, Ostensibly from a different dimension, if you want to think about it in those kinds of terms. Um, so yeah, I think that in some cases that there are different labels that cultures give to these entities, and we live in a in a postmodern, thoroughly materialized, naturalized world, and so we are as a society, as a culture, our intellectual default is to render the potential of these entities as extraterrestrial biological entities. So it's all chemistry and biology, but those are, even some of the cutting edge philosophers now can crack apart, a materialist perspective of reality. It's just not sufficient enough anymore. Um, so
Yeah, who's to say
yeah,
that all
they're
these
they're
things weren't already on the planet? Or you look back at world mythology, and you look at fallen angels, which are
clearly
the giants
clearly
and
they.
the Nephilim.
Mhm.
Who's to
Yes,
say they
I
weren't
think.
alien?
Well, again, even if you're talking about the giants that are referenced in the Bible, they have human pedigree, and they have angelic pedigree. They have biological components that are not from this dimension.
And look, all
So
these
they would
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, they have wings and stuff, but Ken and Dr. Burton, like when they draw them, they always draw them flying. And they, I mean, look at the Vimanas and stuff like that, and wings. And were they actual wings or were they metal wings? Like, it makes you
Right. Well,
wonder.
I mean, if I wanted to draw something that I was trying to indicate was something that was flying in the sky, one way I would possibly do that is to put wings on something, even if it didn't literally have wings, because the wings are symbolically showing that it's in the air like a bird, right? So it's quite possible. Like, I think we need to be flexible in the way that we interpret what we're seeing, and also to realize that
Agreed.
there's been thousands of years of telephone tag. So
Yeah.
we're not seeing the original story. One of the projects I'm working on now is I've made a database that has every single word from the Old Testament in Hebrew,
Oh
and
wow.
I'm going through and I'm comparing every case of every instance of each word, and finding the discrepancies where, so for example, one word might mean hill over here in this particular case, and then somewhere else we've translated it differently, and
Right.
sometimes it makes sense to do that. Like, for example, the word for hill is also sometimes used to describe breasts. Well, that makes sense. Hills and breasts are similar um, in some way, but also then there's other cases where you really start to question, what the heck were these translators on? Because this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And especially when you have a word that means one thing 1,000 times, and then over here in this one case, it means something totally different. Yeah, I'm not buying that, right? So something's up. So I don't know. That's one of the things that I'm working on, but I probably won't have uh, a lot of really solid results for another 10 years, because it's just a lot of analysis that has to go into
I
it.
was about to say that's a pretty hefty linguistic undertaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not just in Hebrew, but in any literary tradition, context is so important. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I always thought was interesting is that there are a lot of shared literary types in the ancient Near East, so that you see a lot of the same kinds of poetic devices and literary devices used in, let's say the praise of Yahweh in the Old Testament, that you would find in the worship of Baal amongst the Phoenicians and the Canaanites, like titles like the rider on the rider of the clouds, or rider on the storm.
Exactly.
Those a lot of my brothers and sisters in the church aren't really comfortable with that. But
Well,
to me, it's
it is.
Go
It
ahead,
is an
Ken.
uncomfortable thing to think about, because
Mhm.
our concept of God in theology is that he is in some ways far away, in some ways he's right here, but he's this a very otherworldly, right? So
Mhm.
to think of God in terms of, like, okay, he rides on a machine that flies. Well, now you're
Mhm.
limiting God's ability, and you're saying if God wants to fly through the sky, he has to use a flying machine. Well, that smacks of
Mhm.
anthropomorphizing God, which is it's obviously sacrilegious, or uh, heresy in many ways. And in recent history, uh, people have been killed for saying things like that. So I think that it's difficult even still to reconcile such concepts in our own mind.
But
Partic-
Ken, you mentioned about flying. I'll go back to the Vimanas again. Sure, that's
yeah,
written down all over in
yeah,
the Eastern culture that they flew.
absolutely.
right?
I mean, it comes up in a couple of places. But it certainly is there, and it's a key concept in some of these stories. And the Hindu and Sikh people that I have spoken to about that take those as historical events. I mean, same as Christians take all the concepts in the Bible as historical events, but we tend to put like a spiritual spin on things, whereas the people in India, the culture is that no, this is literally they're just talking about this thing, and there was literally a machine that flies and literally a man driving the thing. So it's similar, but it's also a little bit different. And I think that that's a fascinating thing to think about. And then we also see these flying. Sometimes they're more represented more as a flying beast or rather than a machine. But if you look across almost any culture you can think of, there's some kind of creature that flies. I think of like the South American concepts of Quetzalcoatl, and it goes by a few other names as well, in which
Viracocha.
Viracocha, yeah, and Viracocha is very much a Jesus figure. He seems to ride on a flying boat, and he disappears again over the ocean. So like, what's that all about? And also, what did Viracocha do? He came, he brought wisdom, he brought learning, he brought technology. So there's a lot of correlations between that and between Jesus, who came to heal, he came to enlighten. The Buddha, the same thing, comes to enlighten. Prometheus steals fire from the gods in order to bring technology, and again circles back to the Enoch story, where the Watchers they not only do they come and have sex with the women, sure they do that, but they also are here to teach mankind about various things, and they list a bunch of stuff in there, and there's some strange things. So metallurgy, okay, yeah, you would expect to see metallurgy, um, but then like makeup and I can't remember the exact phrase they use, but like basically magic
Oh,
spells.
yeah, and a lot of that is ascribed to one Watcher, Azazel.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's a strange marriage of practical and occult knowledge.
yeah, fascinating stuff. And like you, I think that you could interpret that as like biology, math, herbs. So there's a lot of different things that could be encompassed in that. And so if you think about um, more of like a Star Trek approach, where the characters on Star Trek are not allowed to interfere, they're not allowed to make first contact.
Only the
But
guys in the red shirts can.
yeah, exactly. But
For
and
a
to
lot of
be
those.
fair, yeah, to be fair, that does happen, and it happens on both ways, right? Like, so every time you have cultures clashing, or even if cultures are meeting, cultures are clashing. That's historically the way it is, and it's sad, but it seems to be the same old story. So, of course, these bringers of wisdom are the exception to that. But for every Viracocha, you have to wonder how many red shirts were there before
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. And, it's global. They all wanted to educate the world. And it seems like it all happened around the same time. Like, how did it all happen so fast?
Yeah, I don't know if like in terms of just evidence, there's a lot that we can't nail down in terms of timeline. That's another project I'm working on, is coming up with a timeline of everything we know, and another big
Same.
project. But like I feel like we have a long way to go in terms of reassessing some of our assumptions on dating things. I know that recently we're certainly making strides there. I mean, Gobekli Tepe is a prime example. But even Graham Hancock, who was like one of the main proponents of, hey, guys, civilization is older than we think. Even he falls into the same trap where he says Gobekli is the first civilization or the first evidence of religious or however he was describing it. He still used the word first. Like, why? It doesn't, there's nothing indicating that this is the first. The only
Right.
thing we know is this happened at that time. So about 12,000 years ago, this was happening. That does not by any means mean that it wasn't happening somewhere else earlier. And we're seeing, you're an archaeologist. I'm sure you could give me a bunch of references for sites in North America where we're finding evidence of I don't want to say civilization, but let's say evidence of like things that modern humans do, and that we've been doing it for a lot longer than we would have earlier thought, like 10 years ago, that people would have just said, no, that's insane. Don't be ridiculous. Like, I know
Yeah,
one example. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
Well, one example that I know of off the top of my head is that there's a native band sort of near where I live. I mean, it's not super near, but close enough. And they have been, telling in their oral tradition, they say that they used to live at this certain place, and then the waters rose up and they could not, they had to abandon that land. Well, it turns out there's an island in the Pacific Ocean just off the coast, which is that's where they said they were. Now it's an island. Archaeologists went out there a couple of years ago and were able to find the site and find a lot of archaeological evidence, and um, they were able to date it to, I believe it was like 14,000 years ago. So these people were saying all along, yeah, we were here before the end of the ice age, before the waters started melting, before the glaciers started melting and the oceans rose up 400 feet. Yeah, that's part of their story. And so we're so far behind in catching up on that knowledge that is already encaptured in that oral tradition.
My cat is saying hello, if you're wondering.
Yes.
What's that in the
I
background?
heard that.
He said hello. But I think that we covered a lot of different topics, and I think there's so many other ones that I want to talk about. We didn't even get to talk about your other two books before Roswell, and the other one. Did you want to make some mentions of those before we peace out?
Sure. Just real quickly. So, Before Roswell is a book that I wrote with Barbara DeLong, who I think you might know, and we noticed that
Yeah, shout out. Sorry to Barbara DeLong. She's coming on season 4, episode 3.
Oh, right on. So we'll hear from her soon. So yeah, Barbara and I took some notes that her husband, her late husband, had gathered, and
Patrick?
Patrick, and so we took Patrick's notes and we decided that, hey, these are just kind of sitting here doing nothing. We should get them out there, and so we work backwards from 1947. I don't talk about UFOs after 1947 because there's just too much smoke screen happening and there's too much disinformation being fed in, so I can't tell what's what. But before 1947, before the government started getting involved, there was just people reporting on things that they had seen, and the newspapers were being straightforward and saying, "Here's the story that this guy told me," and so that tradition goes back thousands of years, and we basically go year by year stepping backwards. and kind of do a reverse chronology, almost like we were doing an archaeological dig, and just looking at all kinds of evidence that's there, and
Yeah,
really
like
looking for patterns.
the Red Baron, 1917, shot
Yeah,
down
yeah,
the first UFO in Germany.
yeah. Well, not the first, but
Quick,
No.
quick question, Ken. Did
yeah.
you cover the Texas airship in the 1890s?
Yeah, we did. We traced that one around. Of course, it first appeared, I believe it was like in Oregon, and then it went down to
Mm-hmm.
California, came back up, ended up went into Canada for a little bit, and then came back through the the central, what do
Are
you
you
call it,
talking
the
about the
Midwest.
Coyami,
Well,
Mexico incident with
well,
Novator?
I was thinking of the Aurora airship, but I mean there were a
Yeah.
number of them across
Yes.
North America in particular, but the Aurora airship actually made a stop in my hometown in
Oh, cool,
1897. Yeah.
Virgo.
cool.
Hmm.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing. We're
Yeah,
coming
a
up
lot
on
of
the
really cool stories.
55-minute mark, but do you want to give a shout out to the paradox bullshit
Sure.
one?
Sure. So if you don't like that kind of language, there's also another version of this book, which is called Fermi's Paradox Debunked. Um, and that one, these are both available on Amazon. So search as you will. That one is basically kind of just takes on the concept of Fermi's paradox. Well, the weird thing about it is that Fermi was not involved in it in any way. He made one offhand comment to a buddy of his at one point, which then people tried to sort of backdatedly give him credit for.
And for the people
And
listening, do you want to explain what that is in the short amount of time we have left?
yeah, sure. So I'll give you the 30-second version. So Fermi was a physicist. He was instrumental during the World War II era, along with Einstein and all those other guys. And basically, later on, somebody decided that they would take his name and make their theory sound like it was coming from somebody smart. And so the theory is, um, it's impossible for there to be aliens because if there were, we would have seen them already. Well,
Uh,
okay, to answer that question, I point you to before Roswell, but also I look at a bunch of other different more scientific sort of tacts on in that Fermi's paradox book. So it's more about like, is it possible for there to be life in space? Have we already found life in space? What about basic things like water? Is there water in space? Yeah, there's tons of it. So just kind of some different stuff that I had not seen presented before.
Love it. There's so many other things that I want to talk about. We're just kind of scratching the surface of everything. And I know a lot of the listeners probably have a ton of questions. So please drop your questions in the comments. This will be on a live YouTube watch party. So maybe you might get lucky and Ken or Dr. Burton might be in the chat and be able to answer some of your questions. Because I'm sure a lot of the watchers and listeners may have some. So do you guys want to start, Ken, giving a shout out to your subscribers and people who are not subscribed? Where can they find your work?
You bet. Yeah, thanks everybody for watching. If you go to my website, dimensionfold.com, there's links there to my Substack. I have two Substacks. One is my kind of my regular Dimension Fold Substack, and then also got a second Substack that's dedicated to that Hebrew project that I was talking about earlier. You'll find links to both of those on there, and you can find all my books on there as well.
Perfect. And Dr. Burton, do you want to give a shout out to your subs and let people know where they can find you?
Yes. Hello, gang. You can find information on my books and the Institute of Biblical Anthropology at burtonbeyond.net. I'm currently building a site just for the Institute itself. I have classwork that I offer through there, and people can follow me on X and Facebook and just now starting to get to the point where I can make more YouTube content. So I'm going to be back there.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for being on the show today. And I really had fun talking with y'all
For the
about
last few years.
ancient stuff.
Well, in a word, ancient stuff. Yes, new perspectives on biblical scholarship. And then the other one is on a site in Israel called the Serpent Mound of Bashan.
Perfect. Well, thank you for all that information, Dr. Burton. And if you want to follow him or find him, check out Burton Beyond and also Dimension Fold for Ken. And thanks again, guys. We're going to leave you with some Bog Team 80s metal music. And don't hang up, folks, because we're going to have a quick off-air chat.